Hi there, my name is Ryan Chatterson, and during this session we're going to be talking about aquaponic cucumber cultivation. Now, just a brief overview, cucumbers can be a fantastic addition to your crop portfolio. They're considered a high dollar crop. So your high dollar crops are really considered tomatoes, cucumbers, maybe eggplants, and peppers. They're very fast growing. They're fairly easy to grow. As far as a risk level, I'd say a medium level risk, so not as high of a level as tomatoes or a really long-term crop. And we must choose the correct variety for our application and for our market. So there's a lot of different types of cucumbers, just like there's a lot of different types of tomatoes and lettuces and every other type of vegetable out there. So we need to choose the right one that's going to make us the most money in the smallest footprint. The type of cucumber you choose depends not only on the market, but the environment that you're going to grow them in. Most cucumbers have a specific environment. They're like a warmer environment, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But let's say you're up north in a cooler environment, specific cucumber varieties will do better in cooler weather conditions. So that's very important to look at when you're buying the seeds. Seeds are fairly expensive and range in the cost of 50 cents to 75 cents per seed. They can go over $1 a seed if you're buying really small quantities. And again, these are for high producing greenhouse varieties of cucumbers, not your field open pollinated cucumbers. Seeds of this caliber will have nearly 100% germination. So you can count on, even though they're pretty expensive, when you plant out 100 seeds, 98 to 99 of them are probably going to go ahead and sprout up for you. For greenhouse growers, parthenocarpic varieties, which are varieties that produce fruit without pollination, are typically chosen. Okay, so they're self-pollinating. We don't need a male-female flower to go ahead and pollinate a female flower. It's going to come out looking like a female flower, pollinate itself, the flower will drop and the fruit will develop. And this way, every single fruit that comes out that you allow will develop unless it's overbearing on the plant. So because of this, we do not require any bees or other pollinators inside the greenhouse to ensure fruit set. That's a really good thing, because even though bees aren't that much more money to incorporate into an inside structure, that's one less thing we need to worry about, because we know they're all going to get pollinated. So that's a good thing. This reduces labor and increases production, which more than offsets the increased cost of the seed. So compared to an open pollinated variety, they might be really cheap, but the maintenance to clean up the mess from all of the flowers dropping off that aren't producing fruit, the maintenance to have a bigger square footage area to produce the same amount of fruit, all of that is not worth the fact that the seed is a lot cheaper. Okay, we spend a little bit more up front and it's going to pay off through the season. So Guianaceous cultivars, which are those that produce only female flowers or predominantly female flowers, should be grown. So why is this? Because if the cultivars have male flowers present on them and the crops cross-pollinate, or even on the same plant, you get cross-pollination that occurs, the fruit will swell as seeds develop, it will turn sour, and it will become inedible. So all of these greenhouse varieties of cucumbers are seedless varieties of cucumbers. That's why they're self-pollinating. There's no male genetic material going ahead and pollinating and making seeds inside of that fruit. The fruit develops by itself without seeds. So what happens when we bring male flowers into the mix, into these all self-pollinating flowers? Well, it messes things up, and you don't want that. So if you're growing greenhouse varieties, stick to greenhouse varieties that are, again, self-pollinating parthenocarpic varieties. And they tell you that right in the seed description when you're trying to buy them. But don't stick something that has male flowers like a Boothby Blonde or something like that, an heirloom cucumber that is open pollinated. Don't stick it in the corner of your greenhouse, because you can mess up the rest of your production. It's all right to grow those, but grow them outside or grow them in a different structure. Traditionally, European seedless cucumber varieties are chosen for greenhouse production. Okay, they're long, large European cucumbers. You may commonly here in the US see them in the grocery store for $2 to $4 each, and they're usually wrapped in a long piece of plastic and they're sold singly. So fruits are long and slender, generally 12 to 14 inches in length. The fruits weigh approximately 1 pound at harvest. And the fruits have thin skins and need to be wrapped immediately to keep the fruit from going limp. Okay, and that's why you always see them wrapped in that plastic. And they don't last very long. Many cucumber varieties are now becoming well established in the marketplace. I like to think we have a local part in doing that here. I've been growing mini cucumbers before it was a popular thing, and you could tell right off the bat, people liked it better. It's preferred by the customers. You don't have to chop up a whole cucumber every time you want to snack on a few or have a few in a little bit of dressing. That's not something you have to do. You have these small cucumbers that are, we sell them as a snacker cucumber, and they're seedless, they're delicious, they're small, they're burpless, and they have all the bells and whistles, but you can eat a few at a time and you can put the rest away and they stay fresh. Instead of having to slice up a cucumber, slice part of it, put the rest of it in the fridge and wrap it up, it's a lot easier to deal with. You get a higher selling price per pound. They don't require a tight plastic wrapping to keep the fruit crisp. I would still, pick them when it's appropriate in the morning when they're nice and crisp and store them in a refrigeration unit, but you don't have to go through the process of individually wrapping each fruit. And there's less risk as a grower as it spreads out your risk over more fruit. All right, so when it takes you 20 days or whatever it is to get a 14-inch long cucumber, and maybe a caterpillar comes in and eats a hole through the middle of it, you got to cut that thing off and throw it away. Versus if you have that spread out into 10 mini cucumbers and a caterpillar comes in and gets in one of those, well, you throw that away and you still have 9, okay? So it really lowers the risk, and it is a little more risky when you're growing big, large cucumbers because they're on the plant for a long time and they're susceptible to anything in that environment that can hurt them. If you have a good IPM and you don't have any insects in there, of course they're going to develop perfectly, but there's always that increased risk. Whoops, okay. So we've got a couple pictures here, and right here we've got some of our longer cucumbers, European type cucumbers, and you can see them developing. And even though they looked bunched up here, they're not really bunched up. They're actually at each node, and you can see them kind of spaced like that going up the entire main stem. Something else you'll notice in this picture is the twine that's wrapped around the stem. It's hard to probably see through the TV if you're watching this, but when you open up the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see how there's actually twine wrapped around this stem. Well, this is kind of what differs between how we are going to trellis and train cucumbers versus tomatoes. Tomatoes, we just clip them with those the tomato clips like we talked about. Well, with these, we're actually going to wind the head of the plant around the string as it climbs up the plant. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's a good picture that shows it. Here are some of our medium-sized cucumbers, okay? We just had our really long 12 to 14-inch cucumbers. These are more in the medium range that are going to get 6 to 8 inches and pretty beefy. Still a nice seedless, smooth, thin-skin variety. All of these are thin-skin varieties, and they're called a burpless variety. A thicker skin on a cucumber is known to give gas. So if you have a thick-skinned, normal field-grown cucumber, they're not a burpless variety. When the skin is thinner, that's why they need the plastic wrapping to keep them fresh, but they become something that doesn't give people gas, and they call it a burpless cucumber. That's just for your knowledge and for your selling information when you're trying to explain this to people. Here is some of our miniature cucumbers. This is Isnik, I believe. It's a real small 2 to 3 inch cucumber, and you get multiple cucumbers at each node developing. Again, people love them. And here's another, I believe this one's called Unistar, and you can see all the cucumbers that develop They just come out in bunches. So really nice, and it's a smaller plant, smaller leaves, so you can get a little bit more in your area. Large European seedless varieties, specific names that I would suggest that you start growing, that I have grown in the past and had great success with, are Tyria, Socrates. This is great for colder conditions. Eunice, Diva, and Katrina. Some of the mini seedless varieties are Isnik and Unistar. That's what I would suggest right now. I had some other ones in the past, but again, like a lot of these varieties, they fade in and then they get better and they fade out and they take on new names. So this is my list as it is right now. What I would suggest is to call the seed company. I've suggested this before. These guys like to talk to people. I spent years in a call center on a phone solving people's problems, okay? We like a call from somebody that wants good information. So call them, let them know your situation, and let them help you pick the right cultivar for your operation. They have real farmers who have experience with their product. Use the free advice. You know, you could hunt on the internet all day for people, you know, telling you how these things are going to grow. But why not call the people selling it that are going to be accountable for what they tell you and talk to their specialists that have actually grown the stuff? Okay, that's better than an internet opinion. Some varieties will work better than others depending on environmental conditions like temperature and relative humidity. And that's, again, like we said in the slide before, we had one for colder conditions. Know what the greenhouse conditions need to be and the environment needs to be to cultivate these cucumbers, and then look specifically at where you're at, and maybe where you can get a little energy savings by picking a cultivar that can be adapted closer to what your local environmental conditions are. All right, it all comes down to efficiency. Cucumbers are considered a warm weather vegetable. They prefer air temperatures in the 80 to 85 degree Fahrenheit range. So it's 26.5 to 29.5 Celsius for consistent, uniform fruit production and to meet production standards, so commercial production standards. For looking up online, what does this variety produce, or what should we get per acre of greenhouse production? If you want to meet those numbers, you need to be in that range. Water temperature should range between 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 24 to 26.5 Celsius. Temperatures over 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 Celsius will cause fruit quantity and quality to be reduced. All right, it does not like temperatures that hot, and your plant and fruit will suffer as a consequence. Potassium mobility is affected within that fruit. So as temperatures get high, you get potassium is less mobile and you get misshapen fruit. You'll get bell-shaped fruit. You'll get fruit with real skinny heads and they bell out to a fat bottom. And that is classic potassium deficiency. And that's caused directly from that temperature fluctuation. All right, it will also cause leaf stress and wilt from transpiration, which signals to antagonistic insects that the plant is weak. So you're going to be ringing a dinner bell to all the bad bugs out there that you've got weak plants and that there's an easy target, okay? You don't want to do that. Take measures to keep temperatures within the recommended range, and many of these issues that everyday growers face will disappear. Okay, it's usually when we fall outside of these recommended ranges in any of these plants that a lot of the issues that we have to overcome and figure out what they are, that's when a lot of them pop up. If we keep standard conditions, it's a lot easier to grow things. It's when we grow within the seasons, within natural climate changes and natural, rainstorms and light changes and all this and that, that's when things become a little bit harder. So the more controlled the environment is, the less, changes we're going to see and the less of these problems are going to pop up. That's why you shouldn't feel bad in the backyard when you're wondering how these guys get 60 pounds of tomatoes or 50 pounds of tomatoes a year off their plants. Well, I couldn't do that in my backyard either. You don't have a 10-foot overhead cable support structure and hundreds of feet of enclosed space to run your tomato plants. It's a big difference there. So don't feel bad. Most backyard people, I think they undercut what they're actually doing. So feel good about what you're producing and just know a lot of this comes down to how much money you're investing into the structure structure and the other controls here for the environment for that plant to grow. Cucumbers are much more sensitive to low temperatures than tomatoes. Okay, they will melt on the vine. Cucumbers and leaves, everything to that plant. They're very sensitive to cold temperatures. Temperatures below 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18.3 Celsius should be avoided, as production and growth will be severely affected. And even if you dip down into the 50 degree Fahrenheit range and come back up, your plants will be affected throughout their life cycle, even if they look like they're okay to the naked eye. Some of the inner cell structure, the liquid in that plant, has damaged the cellular tissue in there, and your plants are going to slow down, and they're nowhere near going to be as productive as they were before. Cucumbers will have more soft tissues and subcutaneous tissue growth than tomatoes will, and it does not come back good from cold snaps. Airflow requirements are very similar to tomato crops. High humidity will quickly lead to mildew problems. Powdery mildew is very common in downy mildew in cucumber crops. So we need to keep the airflow high. It's when you cut the airflow down and you get humidity that sets in that little microclimate around the plants, that's when you get these spores to become active and become a real problem for you. So high humidity can also lead to the formation of air roots, which can negate the effects of grafting rootstock to the desired scion. So I'm not going to go into how we graft cucumbers during this talk, but what I am going to tell you is some people also graft cucumbers just like we graft tomatoes. You can graft melons, you can graft eggplants. There's a lot of plants that we can graft in the greenhouse. And I can tell you that if you want to research a little further, it's fairly easy to look this up online and learn how to graft cucumber plants as well. But if we graft cucumber plants and we go through that whole process and we have too high of humidity, we'll form air roots above the graft that will travel down and go into your media, and that negates having a rootstock in the first place, because that's going to pull up disease, whatever we're trying to keep out by using a rootstock. All right, so keep humidity down. Again, 2 times greenhouse area, square footage per hour. So we've done this example, if it was 3,000 square feet, times 2, that's 6,000 square feet, we convert that to CFM. Divide 6,000 CFM by 4 fans, 1,500 CFM per fan. Seeds should be sprouted at the recommended temperature given on the seed packet. They're going to tell you what to actually sprout these seeds at. Some varieties, like pickling cucumbers, will require slightly lower temperatures for proper germination. The majority of seeds will sprout within 1 to 3 days of being planted, so they sprout extremely quick, especially with good seed. Seeds are sprouted at 84 degrees Fahrenheit in rockwool cubes, cocoa fiber, or several other starter medias that are available on the marketplace. In a commercial setting, seedlings are maintained at a slightly lower temperature, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, than when they are transplanted into the system, to ensure that they don't incur any stress from heat at a young age. So they are very susceptible to being harmed from heat stress and from a lack of water stress at a young age. And that sets the plant back for its entire life. Okay, it's like giving cigarettes to a 3-year-old. It's going to set it back for its entire life. So just know that even though visually you may not see this plant being set back, it may look like a big green plant throughout its life cycle, no, it could have done better. Okay, so this is, if we're keeping things strict to strict cucumber cultivation practices, this is what we would do, is we would, after they've sprouted at 84, we'd lower the temperatures to 77 and maintain that until they're ready to be transplanted into their final grow out spot. During the seedling and transplant production stage, the plants must never become stressed for water or nutrients, which I just mentioned. If you want the plants to reach their fullest potential, you have to take the proper steps at every single level to ensure the plant is getting what it needs. And you can do it. Okay, it's like a long list. SOP, a standard operating procedure. We just write down every single step that you need to follow. And if you hit that list every day, you're going to grow phenomenal crops. it is unfortunate that it's human nature to become a little lazy, okay? And we forget to do this step, or we are a little lax on this step. And that's what leads to less than desirable harvests. The seedlings are ready to be transplanted into their final destination when they have 3 to 4 true leaves. Transplant before the plants elongate enough to fall over. Okay, they're going to grow straight up, and when they get big enough and heavy enough, they're going to want to fall over because it's a vine. And naturally, if you grow cucumbers outside, they do the same thing. They grow up and then they fall over and they vine across the ground. Well, we don't want them to do that. We don't want that kink in the stem. So transplant them before they do that and start training them up that twine wire. Take your time transplanting, as the seedlings and the roots are extremely fragile on these plants. You're going to have a large root mass by the time you transplant this. Damaging the taproot sets the crop back days and opens the door for infection to set in. So do your best to not damage that taproot when you're placing it into its final grow out position. They can be grown in deep water culture systems, Dutch buckets, cocoa fiber slabs, and several other different types of systems. Media beds, NFTs, I'm sure, anything out there, I'm sure we can grow this crop in. These are the best suited apparatuses to grow it in. These are indeterminate, long-term crops, so try to plant them as low to the ground as possible, just like tomatoes. We don't want to start out at waist high and only have a few feet to work with before we're up at the top of the cable, all right? In a commercial setting, they do that, but they have a commercial scissor lift that lifts them 20 feet in the air to work on these crops. Most of you guys aren't going to have that. Have vertical twine for training the plant ready when the plants are transplanted, okay? Just like here, when the plants go into their spot in the deep water culture system, I already have a piece of twine from the overhead cable down and tied onto the raft through that hole, so that as soon as they're growing up, we can start circling them around the twine as they grow. And cucumber plants grow fast. I'm talking inches a day. So this isn't something that takes forever. They really start to take off when they go into their final spot. Later on, when probably near the end of the course, we'll also post some footage from one of my previous workshops in where we're showing how to train tomato plants. Well, in that I also show how to train cucumber plants. So you'll see first person a greenhouse full of cucumber plants and how we've trained those and what they kind of look like in person. Greenhouse varieties of large European cucumber plants have very large leaves, grow vigorously, and require large amounts of sunlight. Greenhouse miniature varieties of cucumber plants have smaller leaves. They're 25 to 50% smaller than the large European cucumber leaves. Okay, some of the European cucumber leaves are this big. They're huge. They grow vigorous and they require large amounts of sunlight. So the big difference is it's just a little smaller amount of plants, smaller leaf structure, smaller fruit. That makes sense. Large cucumber varieties require 7 square feet per plant, so almost double what a tomato plant would require, because it's a really big plant with an open growth habit. Miniature cucumber plants require 5 square feet per plant, though I have grown them with great success at 4 square feet per plant. So the packages are going to tell you 5 square feet per plant, but I can tell you I've grown probably 600 cucumber plants to fruition now throughout seasons at a 4 square foot spacing, miniature varieties, so like the snacker size varieties, and they really did good. And I have pretty high airflow, so that's something you're going to require, but they did good. Spacing the plants too close will lead to reduced airflow, high humidity levels around the plants, and mildew problems. So something I can say is when I grow cucumbers, I don't grow an entire greenhouse of just cucumbers. So that helps me with a lot of these airflow issues, because I don't have just the static walls of cucumbers stopping airflow through the greenhouse. We usually just grow 1 row of cucumbers at a time along with other crops, because that's kind of how our business is set up, is selling multiple varieties. So we don't run into a lot of those high humidity issues that you may when you're specifically monocropping cucumbers. Plants should be allowed to climb up the vertical cord used for training the plant. As the plant grows, you should be rotating the growing point around the cord daily so that you're slowly wrapping the plant around the cord as it grows. Okay, the tendrils, which are small, it almost looks like a small vine growth that comes off of the side of the plant, they wrap around whatever's near them and hold on tight, and that's how the vine clings to things naturally. Well, the tendril can be allowed to remain on as long as they're not distorting the fruit or choking leaves. Now, I always learn to remove all of the tendrils when you're growing greenhouse commercial cucumber crops. Clip them all off because they have the chance, big 12-inch cucumber, they have the chance of wrapping around that, pulling tight and distorting that fruit and making it unsellable. All right? They can also do that to the main growing stem of the plant and choke off the growth. So I was always told to do that, and that's what I have always done. However, when I was out visiting the University of Arizona's Controlled Environmental Agriculture program, they left all of the tendrils on their large European cucumber varieties. And the teacher, the doctor there, explained to me that they don't have much of a problem with the tendrils reaching out and grabbing onto fruit, just every now and then. And when they do, they go ahead and remove them. But other than that, they'd rather keep them on for added support that they can add by clinging on to that twine. So I will leave this up to you. I think maybe it's a good idea to leave one every now and then and allow it to attach to the twine for extra grip strength. Or you can always use a tomato clip and clip onto that twine, put it under a set of leaves and use that as like a stopping point so you don't have the whole vine in a windy situation, which shouldn't happen in an enclosed environment, but in a super windy situation during a storm, if they get moving, that whole vine can, like a cord, collapse down, kind of accordion down on that string if you don't have it attached with a clip or something like that. So in a perfect situation, you never have that kind of weather situation. In my situation, we have a lot of open winds coming through, so I stick a clip up near the top, probably 2 or 3 leaf sets down, so it's a nice mature leaves, just in case you had something like that happen that would cause a slipping event, that will act as a stopper. If they do, again, if these tendrils do, remove them from the plants daily. I still remove mine. As the plants grow larger and begin to set fruit, remove and discard all the fruit from the first 30 inches of growth, okay? From the start, 30 inches up. This is very important. This allows the plant to vigorously produce early vegetative growth that is essential for maximum fruit production. So we need enough leaf mass to be able to power the fruit production. Think of these leaves as solar panels. We need enough solar energy here to power, to give juice to those growing fruit. And if you allow the beginning fruit to develop, the first ones on the plant, which is very enticing because you've been waiting a while to see fruit, if you allow those to develop, you will see fruit, but you're setting the plant back. And again, if we want maximum production, sometimes we have to take steps in the beginning that seem a little harder to get what that plant can really produce. But if you do this, I guarantee you're going to see massive production out of these cucumber plants. It can be enticing, again, to keep them on, but you're hurting yourself in the long run. And at the end of the growth cycle, and you think, man, I thought I was supposed to get 5 more, 6 more pounds of cucumbers, hear my voice in there saying, I told you so, you should have done this. The cucumber plants are grown to an overhead cable, all right, really similar to the tomato plants. But we don't lean and lower the cucumber plants. If they are healthy enough to continue growth, meaning there's no nutrient deficiencies, they're not infested with bugs, there's not something that's telling you to take these down, then the main growing point is allowed to grow above the top cable until there's 2 sets of leaves, and then it's trimmed off. And what that allows is 2 side branches will sprout out of those 2 sets of leaves. You get a side branch that sprouts out of each one, creating 2 new leads for this plant. All right? The 2 side branches are draped over that overhead cable and allowed to grow back down to the floor. Okay, I believe this is called the Dutch umbrella technique. So it grows all the way up to the cable. We let it go a little bit above. We trim the top off. 2 new heads form, they drape down over the other side of the cable and form fruit the entire way down. It's kind of like one of those upside down tomato plants that you see people hang in a pot and the tomato plant hangs out of the bottom and all the fruit naturally by gravity hangs. Well, it's the same way that these work. The large clusters of fruit should be pruned. Now we're talking on large cucumbers, the European cucumbers. They should be pruned so that only 1 to 2 fruit remain at each node. The mini varieties can support many more fruit per node, but you should talk to your seed supplier for the best information. I know like that Isnik variety I've grown, and you can get 5 to 10 fruit per node on that if you've got a nice healthy plant. So a lot more fruit per node. If too many fruit are left at a single node, you can experience sudden fruit drop and none will develop at all. Okay, it's just too much energy required, and because of that, none of them will develop. They'll just drop off the plant. The plant's trying to reserve energy probably for the next fruit set to gain a little bit more energy up. Fruit should be harvested daily in a large operation. It's a daily routine, all right? Every 2 to 3 days in smaller operations with less requirements for fruit uniformity. So that's a big thing in cucumber markets, is you need the fruit to be the right size, and fruit grows quick. Depending on the stage of life, you can see several inches of growth overnight in a fruit. So you need to pick these on the right day, or all of a sudden they're too big for the box that you're shipping them in, or they're larger than the shelf that the customer has to sell them on. So these are very important things to keep in mind. It's not, wow, I got an extra inch of cucumber. It's, hey, this isn't exactly what that consumer specified, and you're probably not going to be able to sell it. Harvest in the morning for highest weight and longest shelf life. So they're going to be sweating all day, and the fruit's going to weigh less. In the morning, they're going to weigh more. Vice versa, because they're sweating, they're going to be more nutrient dense right before sunset, as that's been going on all day and they've been losing water. The fruit itself will have a higher Brix and be more nutrient dense. So if you're looking for personal nutrition, or if you're looking for somebody that really wants a nutrient dense product, that's how you do it. That's one way to manipulate the Brix level within these fruit. But by doing that, having less moisture content, you're lowering the shelf life and you're slightly lowering the weight. So just keep that in mind. If it's going fresh, for fresh use, that doesn't really matter. It will still serve its purpose. One more thing here. Delayed harvest of fruits slows the plant down in a big way. All right, that means if you forget to harvest the fruit, hey, I'm going away for a long weekend and nobody's going to be there. Oh, well, I'll deal with it on Monday. You just shot yourself in the foot, okay? Because if that fruit isn't picked right when it's supposed to, the plant is really still trying to make it develop seed. It's trying to get it to reproduce. So it's going to pump all its energy into those fruit to get them really giant. Well, that sets the entire rest of the plant above that fruit. It slows it down because it's not putting energy into the development of that. And it could do it so much so that it causes collapse of your plant, especially depending on how many fruit you allowed to develop and how many that it's actually putting all its energy into to get to that final maturity stage. So make sure you don't do this. You know, think of them as a live animal. They don't like you going away on vacations. They don't like any of that. You got to pay attention to these guys. They're really quick growers. Very similar to the requirements of tomato plants and pepper plants, capsicums, as far as nutrition is required, but they have increased potassium needs. That's the big difference between a tomato recipe and a cucumber recipe, potassium. The pH, they prefer between 5.5 and 6.0. And when fruiting starts, nutrients are depleted substantially quicker. So these plants grow quick. As they're juveniles and small plants, okay, they grow slow. When they reach maybe, I'd say 12 inches tall, watch out, because these plants take off and you can almost watch them grow. That's how quick that they're growing. And because they're growing and putting on so much leaf mass and tissue mass so quickly, they're using up nutrients quickly. So when we look at PF values and things, at the very beginning of their life stage, you're right. If you're thinking, wow, that thing seems like a lot, you're right. They're not going to use quite as much at the beginning of their life stage. But as soon as they hit that point, they're gonna hit it hard, and you're going to see nutrients start to move in that system water if you're not feeding around the right amount. Okay, so you can definitely ease the feed amount up if that works on your fish side. While these plants are young, keep it a little bit lower than that PF value, but that PF value is a grow out value, and it would still be fine to be feeding that while these are juvenile plants. So here's a nutrient concentration chart specifically for the cucumbers, all right? And we've got nitrates 22.6 to 34.3. We still got total ammonia nitrogen right in the same range as our tomato chart. And, you know, I could go through reading all these, but I think the big difference that you're going to see, because I know that's the changes that I make to my solution, are this potassium is going to be higher in our cucumber solution. They really need that or you get misshapen fruit, and you won't be able to hold a lot of fruit at one node. You won't be able to hold 10 mini cucumbers. You'll you know, get 2 or 3 that set, and you'll get 7 that get misshapen, that get yellow ends, rot, and fall off. So if you want high production, you gotta do something to influence that potassium. And for me, that's dosing more potassium bicarbonate into that system, or potassium hydroxide, to influence that potassium levels up to our desired growth rate. Common pests experienced in the production of cucumbers are aphids, caterpillars, thrips, cucumber beetles, and spider mites. Caterpillars and cucumber beetles we can keep out with screen, okay? So those are not even a problem. We'll write those off. Just use some screen. That's a big thing with growing any of these crops. It's long term. You want to get away from using pesticides? Let's keep the mothers out. Keep the moths and the butterflies and the beetles out of there. So then it really leaves us with aphids, thrips, and spider mites. And those are all soft-bodied insects, and we've already learned how to kill all of those. So that's a really good thing, and those aren't too hard to control. I actually have a aphid and parasitic wasp battle going on in my greenhouse right now, and the wasps are winning just like they always do. Mildew can often become an issue when growing dense crops with inadequate air circulation and elevated humidity levels. All right, we've talked about that. If you don't have the right airflow through there, it's really easy for a small humid microenvironment to form around those leaves and for mildews and molds to set in. So we have powdery mildews, probably number one you're going to see. Then you've got downy mildew, which is also a bad guy. These are treated with a diluted spray of potassium bicarbonate or sodium bicarbonate if you're careful not to use so much that you cause salt burn. So sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, is what they use in field crops. That's really common spray to get rid of this. And what it does is you're basically changing the pH on the surface of that leaf tissue. And by changing the pH on the surface, it makes it inhospitable for these mildews to inhabit. All right? The problem is sodium bicarbonate is it's sodium, okay? And we don't want to spray a lot of sodium in the water. Too much sodium, we get a salt buildup, and that could you know, affect our plants in a manner that we don't want. So we treat, here I treat with potassium bicarbonate. It's very easy. You can buy it as an organic approved little bottle of powder, or you can also purchase it in much larger quantities from wine making places or brewery stores, because they use potassium bicarbonate to make wine, okay, as a food grade material. So we bought some that was, I think it was a 50 or 100 pounds at a time, much cheaper than buying a little bottle of Green Cure, which is the brand name of an organic OMRI certified potassium bicarbonate. But very easy. Once you know, a lot of times in the US we can forecast, the USDA will forecast when mildews are coming, because it'll move from our end of the country, from Florida, all the way up the eastern seaboard. So the guys up north get a heads up, hey, it's on its way, it's going to be to you in 2 weeks, and they can go ahead and start spraying their crops down. We don't get a warning really, but I have a calendar, and if you're smart, guess what? You write the stuff down on your calendar, and you're your best friend. You're your own warning system, and you can look at that calendar and know, hey, for the last 3 years, 2 weeks from now, it's going to happen. And you start your spray early, and you can really ward off a lot of those bad effects. So there's also diseases. You can get cucumber mosaic virus, several other types of viruses. They're all transplanted by juice-sucking insects, just like we've talked about with the tomato plants, whiteflies, aphids, anything that's sticking its mouth part into the plant and pulling plant juices and then traveling to another plant and doing the same thing. That will transmit disease. So insects, it's also transmitted by unclean shears or scissors when you're trimming plants. If you have a diseased plant, You trim up leaves on one, go to the next one, trim up leaves on that, you can transmit the disease. So if you have any kind of disease present in your environment, by all means sterilize those scissors with some alcohol or something else between uses so that you don't infect other plants. Keep virus transmitting insects out of the growing area. That's really the easiest cure here. Keep up a good IPM, keep a good monitoring system, and then you don't get to that stage where you have 400 cucumber plants wiped out with cucumber mosaic virus. And disinfect pruning shears between plants. All right, that's really big. You don't have to, it's hard to do, okay? It's another big step, but if you have disease present, it's a must. If you don't have disease present, you can go non-disinfected until you see it, but you always run that risk of if you hit a plant and you infect others before you notice the symptoms, you might have really hurt your production, all right? And then that's gonna bring us to the end here. So if you have any questions, don't be shy. By all means, email me, Ryan at collegeofaquaponics.com, and I'll definitely be sure to answer them. I hope you got a real good idea of what it takes to produce cucumbers. They're not as scary as tomatoes or some of these other crops. They're really fast growing, and everybody loves cucumbers, okay? There's a big market for that. So I hope this helps you to add this to your foray of vegetables that you can grow, and I will talk to you during our next session. Thank you.